Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play ActRaiser 2. In the last part we continued through several more stages and ended off entering the death field here, which is decently aptly named, and I guess we're gonna go try and put a stop to the king who's causing wars between Favorian and Justania. The thing I'm not a big fan of in this first third of the stage is the fire visuals. While they look good, specifically the fire hazards I think are very easy to overlook as part of the background at certain points, and because of that, if you're just charging straight forward, you're probably gonna take some dumb damage doing that. With that said, you can jump on the platforms in the background as much as the depth perception of that feels a little weird. Worth noting though, outside of some moments like that, largely this game doesn't feel too janky outside of the learning curve with the Master's gliding arc, which even then is a very intentional learning curve. There's only really maybe two areas in the game that I'd say feel just really weird compared to everything else, and they're more specifically little stage mechanics more than anything. With that said, last time I started going over the little descriptions they have for each of the regions in the game's manual, and I think we only got through Diligence's description, so let's go through a few more. Starting off with Stage 2, which is Turtle Island in Altheria. This country used to be situated on an island. The queen of this island became jealous of the master's power. Out of spite, the queen gave to the demons a precious gift she had received from the master. Angered by this, the master sank the island deep into the ocean. However, part of this island was turned into a tortoise, who now drifts along the sea. The people of this island used to always be very devoted to one another, always thinking of others before themselves. Well, at least the overuse of specific phrases in the exact same part of a sentence carries over to the manual from what we can tell with the overuse of the words the master there. Stage 3 back at Temponia. Modero, located on the lower plains of the Benefic River, used to be a refined country. Rich in spirit, these people lived in moderation. One day, the demon Gluttony conquered this land and consumed all the food. Many people passed away due to starvation and were turned into ghouls by the demons. The ghouls have begun to attack travelers and the people in Modero. And finally catching up with us here in Stage 4, this was a small mountain country famous for its army. Each warrior had a strong sense of justice and was extremely brave. The demon Fury caused the local volcano to erupt and cover the land with lava. The people could no longer grow anything in this country. Soon, the armies began to attack neighboring villages and towns. Currently, they are at war with Favorian. I believe Fury should technically be Wrath because of the 7 Deadly Sins angle, but not too big a deal. Worth noting, that jump cut there was me pausing the game for like 6 minutes to answer some questions my mom had about an upcoming trip to Canada at the time. This footage was recorded about 2 months ago. I would usually just completely restart the level at that point, but I did not want to redo the first section. Mini-boss for the stage is a Pegasus Knight who will occasionally fire projectiles at you, but otherwise will just move vertically back and forth until it's about on level with you and then do a charge across the way. Pretty easy, and if you get an extra MP, pretty good target to use some raging bombs on just to take down the health a little more quickly. So in the middle third of this stage, I largely ignored talking about other stuff, but you're on warships going from one to the other on floating platforms. You can skip certain ships in certain orders by using the flight smartly, but you really want to be careful, maybe play it a little bit safer on that screen than I tend to, as of course you're above a gigantic bottomless pit of death, so a single screw-up is a lost extra life. Which, not for nothing, extra lives in this game are decently rare. Worth noting on that note, I haven't talked about how this game handles deaths yet. Largely whenever there's a fade to black transition, I believe that's a checkpoint. With that said, in certain stages where there's not a fade to black before the mini-boss, like, say, Modero, for instance, where you go through the entire section with the ghouls before the bird mini-boss, you have to start the entire screen over again, which sucks. With that said, if you get a game over in a stage, you're not ejected to the title screen, you're actively just sent back to the Sky Palace world map to select the stage again or go to a different stage in the case you're not feeling ready for the one you just tackled. You never get ejected to the title screen unless your console turns off in some way. And you can just press the B button at any time on the world map to actually get your password from the saving angel, even though I never show that off. But due to that, while I do think ActRaiser 2 is ultimately the harder game in its action stages than ActRaiser 1, I think ActRaiser 2 is a little more generous with how forgiving it is about just cutting you off. Because if memory serves in ActRaiser 1, if you got a game over, you were reverted to your last save, just period. Mind you, comparing the difficulty of ActRaiser 1 and 2 can only really be limited to the action stages because the simulation elements back in ActRaiser 1 make it such a different beast when it comes to analyzing difficulty. Because the simulation stuff, they have their harder or more stressful moments, but it's never really a danger compared to dying in the action stages. And even then, I think ActRaiser 1 has some worse designed bosses at large, but the spells are a lot more powerful in it. So the boss of Deathfield is the king of the attacking nation, and he has 3 distinct attacks. He'll do a jump slice at you, he'll just dash you outright with his sword, but occasionally he'll do a charge swipe, which will generate 3 electrical orbs. You can destroy them outright, but if you don't immediately, they start homing on you for a moment before bouncing wildly across the room. And if you're not using things like raging bombs to take those out in mass, This boss fight can get busy pretty quickly, not for nothing. With that said, when he's relying on his melee, you can largely outrange him with various magic spells, so if you've saved up some MP, this fight, while it can seem a little dangerous and busy at points, is pretty easy to defeat. Largely, in ActRaiser 2 in general to an extent, but also during this big chunk of the game, I'd say your average boss fight is easier than the stage it's contained within, and that's mostly because this is the point where the stages get a little bit busier. Master, you've done it! The King of Justania is asleep, and the war has ended. I hope the people realize the destructiveness of war and never battle again. Yes, the king is asleep after we stabbed him several times and lit him on fire in one of 3 different ways. That's what he is. I feel sort of lonely without the king in town. The loss of the king was unfortunate, but more so was the loss of the people. Many children have lost their parents, and many more were injured. We must defeat the demon to end this tragedy. Indeed, but let's also check out Fivorian while we're here. I forgot to do this before the previous stage. I wonder how these people must have felt after being attacked by a friendly city. It's terrible to have friends fighting with one another. I hope we don't have this type of tragedy again. Almetha volcano in the east has suddenly become active. Let us go there. So our next stage is a volcano stage, which comes with some usual trappings, honestly. The demon fury has entered the volcano. It has started to erupt. If you don't defeat this demon, we will have another king in war like Justania. Master, the volcano is starting to become more violent. Please be careful. So we haven't had a flashing lights warning in this LP, and we're largely not going to have one, but worth noting, this stage, as well as one later on in this video, do have a motion sickness warning. So the motion sickness warning hopefully is immediately obvious. Because the volcano is erupting, for the first good half or so of this stage, the ground and screen are constantly vibrating up and down. That doesn't set me off, but I know it can set some people off. It reminds me a lot of Wheelgator's stage from Mega Man X2, which did very similar stuff, and honestly, I never liked that effect in that game either. The other motion sickness warning in this specific video is much more dire because it even kind of messes with my eyes a little bit, but just be careful. Shaking aside, the first chunk of this level is a pretty straightforward platforming segment that's just filled to the brim with enemies. You should watch out for the ogre adjacent enemies as they are pretty tanky and they can just charge at you outright. But worth noting, the lava on screen here is an instant kill, technically. It's actually just a gap in the platform that allows you to fall into a bottomless pit, so just always be jumping when you see that. Also, I find the end of that screen a little clumsy because they put a sign there just to indicate that the end of the stage is that way, over a bottomless pit, so you just need to jump to the side, and something about that just feels not very graceful. I have a feeling that sign was added in playtesting because some of the playtesters just didn't realize you could jump that way. In this chunk of the stage, though, we're climbing the volcano more directly, and worth noting, you do sort of have a Yoku block adjacent segment going on here, right out of Mega Man, where there's these platforms made of volcanic rock that'll form and deform in a certain pattern that you need to quickly climb up to get up to the top. If you're on one for too long, it just also collapses. With that said, they will respawn. Otherwise, the biggest thing to watch out for are there's these little fire wisp enemies that were also back in the Death Field stage's first third or so that just kind of spawn in very quickly, and if you're just trying to rush through things or past enemies, you might just end up face planting into one of them and face tanking some damage, and yeah, that's not exactly fun. We do get a new enemy in this stage, though, that's going to kind of keep showing up throughout the rest of the game that I don't think we've seen up to now. These flying skulls. They're effectively Medusa heads right out of Castlevania. They move in a wave pattern across the stage left to right, and they'll actually patrol certain areas in some cases, too. But what I don't like about them is that they'll actively show up in really tight corridors at complete random and just blindside you without much of a warning, partially just due to the size of the sprites in this game. To compare to like Castlevania, usually the Medusa heads are pretty small compared to your various Belmont sprites or all that, or the hallways you're in, so you have a little more time to react to them. I feel like maybe 3 times out of every 5, they just completely surprise me, and I cannot do anything about these skulls to react in time and just take a hit. So the final section of the stage is we're on top of falling volcanic rocks. You need to keep moving along to the right because that way you keep yourself above the bottomless pit that's below us at all times. But worth noting, if you go too high when climbing platforms as well, that will also kill you. I assume you probably just wrap around to the bottom of the screen technically and die due to that. The big danger on this screen is either the lightning that occasionally rains down at relatively set locations, because if you're just rushing through, that's probably going to hit you right in your face and you're going to fall into the pit. And actively these smaller rocks, as the longer you stand on them, the more they crumble, and if you're on them for too long, over the bottomless pit, well, guess what's gonna happen? You're gonna lose a life, and that's just gonna feel bad. They do have a surprisingly strict timing for how long you can be on them, but as long as you stagger your steps, you should be fine. I was really ballsy there, I won't lie. Boss of this stage is Rat, who spawns in with and regularly regenerates a fire tornado that acts as a shield. You can destroy that bit by bit, but my best advice is to use the dive attacks, as not only does that cover a lot of the shield at once, like so, it also keeps you relatively safe as long as you position yourself carefully. When the shield is down, he charges up a giant Kamehameha wave fire blast that just moves forward from where he is, and all the while I need to dodge fire rocks that are raining from the sky that are honestly the hardest thing about this fight because you really have no way to predict where they're going to come from. Honestly, he's probably the easiest boss in the game writ large, if only because he does no on-contact damage with you, which was probably them trying to make the fight feel a little more fair, because if you had to dodge around his giant-ass sprite and hitbox while waiting for platforms to spawn in at all, because the bottomless pit is still below you at all times, it would feel a little bit unfair, frankly. But that's this region all cleaned up. Master, you've done it. Master, you've done it! The corruption has stopped. The town is free of the demon. Shall we go and look at the country? Can you be more redundant by saying the same thing twice in a row? Sure thing. In specific, I think for the dialogue of ties to the volcano, we once again need to check out Favorian, not Justania. Finally, this land has been freed from the demon. I hope the people of this town will be okay now. I hope so too. I guess we have no real hint for where to go next. Let's just head south towards our next city. Welcome to Lovaus. This is Lovaus. After a demon defeated the king of the castle, the land was turned to ice. Since then, the king has slept like a child. People have tried many different methods to wake him, but all have failed. Master, let us go to the palace. Master, this is the palace. I feel a cold wind coming from here. It's freezing. Master, please be careful. Well, not much of a lead into this, but I guess we're just going to go raid ourselves a palace. The palace is probably my least favorite chapter of the game writ large, as there's moments where it feels like the platform is a little more precise than I feel like it should be still, or there's weird enemy placements, or honestly in some cases just because it's kind of a bland stage compared to some of the other ones. Because we're noting there's a lot of ice visuals going on here, but there's no actual ice mechanics, which while a lot of people dislike, it's at least a flavor, if that makes sense. Meanwhile, otherwise, we're just dealing with a lot more of the same platform we've seen up to now. Outside of this crab. The crab is a platform that will slowly try to attack you here and again whenever it stops. It can either use its claw on its left or right, or both, depending on its mood. Usually whichever one you're closer to, it'll try to attack with. Something I don't remember to do with this crab, but I do remember to do with one of the later crabs in this stage, is that you can do a jumping down stab to destroy the claws, making it just a straight-up normal platform. Otherwise, whenever you're below ceilings that are lower, maybe hold up on your D-pad to avoid damage from any icicles that might try to fall on you. Largely, they're pretty fair about those because you'll be able to see them coming, but there's times like that one we just saw fall where the icicle spawns off-screen, you have no way to see it. Which, admittedly, is a pretty common thing across a lot of games on the Super Nintendo, but there's times where it really distinctly feels like either they want you to be higher up in the air more often in this game, or at least that the camera is too zoomed in for the level design they chose. But I'm not going to fault the game too much for that, because that was also just a pretty common mistake in general then, and it still is in 2D platformers now, depending on the game. Which is why I do appreciate that. I think it technically started during the PS1, but it became a lot more commonplace starting during like the Wii, PS3 generation. A lot of 2D platformers will actively play with their camera a little bit and maybe zoom out if things are getting a little busier just to give you a little more warning and all that. I think technically the first game I can remember sort of doing that, though, was Sonic CD, with how it made the camera kind of shift to the right when you were going super fast to give you a warning. Albeit it didn't exactly work great in that game. So mini-boss for this stage we might be seeing a couple times throughout the LP is a gargoyle. It has a slash attack, it can jump and fly up in the air while firing fireballs. You try to do a jump slash down on top of you. But something I forget to do for several fights against this thing, because we are going to be fighting like 3 or 4 of these across the game, is you can actively kind of get it into a loop if you get it right up against a wall, where you kind of attack past its shield and hit its hitbox. It tries to immediately do the little stuttered slash you just did, where it pauses before slashing. and then you just hit it again while it's doing that. It's easier to do that against the wall to the right in my experience, but you can do it on pretty much every single instance of these. I think I showed that off on either the second or third one we fight off the top of my head. This next section of the stage kind of sucks. We have more Yoku block adjacent platforming where these ice platforms will just reappear and disappear in a specific pattern. But the timing for them is really tight. Like, if you're not moving immediately from one platform to the next, you're likely just going to fall off the one that just spawned in. Partner that with some surprises from the worms that jump out from below you, and platforms that slowly rise up with some relatively tight timings for double jumps. Yeah, this is probably some of the tightest platforming in the game, even though it doesn't immediately look like it. Which largely comes down to one specific fact about the game that is more felt than seen, but I'll talk more about that in a moment because it's time for the boss fight here, Lust. Lust will move around for a moment before splitting up into 2 little ice cubes, which will then split up into 6 smaller ice cubes that will then reform into a big one and reform into her outright. Rinse, repeat, dodge as best you can. It's decently easy to try and just tank a hit here or do the little dive attack to try and maybe clip through some of the sprite, but as long as you have enough MP for 2 or 3 raging bombs, you're going to be good here because she spends enough of her time when she's vulnerable just standing still that you can just throw the damage onto her pretty quickly. But that's the palace done. Time for us to head back out and see what else is happening around this area, which honestly leads into the other stage that has a big motion sickness warning, but I'll warn more specifically when the motion sickness warning is coming up because it's definitely a little weird. Plus, now that I think about it, I still haven't read the description for this area writ large, so we'll have a little bit of reading to do in the next level. With that said, let's see what our good old buddy has to say. Master, you've done it! Look, the ice is melting. Yeah, that melted pretty much the entire area. We're back to grasslands now. Even though we have defeated the demon, the king is still asleep. Perhaps the demon deception has entered the mind of the king. Master, let us return to the palace and enter the mind of the king. Yeah, both stages here are actually in the same level, which is kind of interesting. The demon deception rules this land. He must be hiding in the king's head. If the king still has faith in you, the image of the demon will still be there. Master, let us enter the mind of the king. Time for us to pull, what was that movie? The Cell, I guess, technically, only it's godly instead of scientific. This stage is structured a little bit weirdly because it's a lot of very small rooms that end with doors you need to walk into that just kind of spawn in after you defeat enough enemies or get to a certain place in time. They also will just throw a bunch of enemies at you in a row like this room here. So the thing that I was talking about a moment ago, where there's a thing about this game's control that you can only really feel rather than see, especially with how I play this game, is that landing on especially small platforms with the glide is surprisingly tricky. Not because you're likely to overshoot them. If anything, you're more likely to undershoot them. Because the thing about the glide is that in order to land on the platform, you need to be any kind of above it, even if it's by a hair. If you look like you're just about to hit the rim of it, you're just going to clip right through the side of it and end up in a bottomless pit more than likely. Which seems kind of like a no-shit Sherlock moment, but when you're actively using the glide, it's slow enough with its descent that it's very easy to both under and overestimate where you're going to go, and it doesn't exactly feel the greatest due to that. Mini-boss of this level is a giant ghost and only has 2 attacks, spawning in ads that'll bounce all over the place, or just trying to punch you outright. This next room is the motion sickness warning. Welcome to a giant maze of pulsating goo. You are walking on a platform using all 4 directions of your D-pad to direct it in certain directions, but every now and then the area will pulsate a little bit more strongly and rotate. The thing is about when it's rotating, you want to stop moving as best you can, because the walls around you will damage you. But the tricky thing here is, when the room rotates, so do your controls. So at the start, pressing up would move me up, but now it'll move me left. And I think as we move around here to this next rotation, it'll start moving me downward. This is a whole bunch to get your head around, and they actively do design the room in such a way where there's a gigantic loop that's very easy to just kind of go in circles in forever. I think on my first playthrough, I almost got a time over in this room because I was just going in a circle constantly. It doesn't feel great, but thankfully after this is immediately the boss fight. Before I get into that though, let's talk about this stage in the manual. The people of this land used to be very loyal followers of the Master. The king of Lampai City, known in the Celestial World as a great believer in the Master, was also a strong leader. One day the demon Deception defeated the king. Soon the people began to lose faith in the Master, forgetting to thank him for what they had received. They began to serve their own desires and interests. Finally, this land was without love and was covered with ice. Boss here is Deception, who usually opens up with a large projectile that follows you before creating a very large explosion that really hurts. When he's not doing that, he can fire a white tracking projectile that'll swap your position with his and vice versa. He can teleport around randomly, often causing him to telefrag you as well, and he can fire both a basic spin attack and a fireball at you as well. He'll also occasionally teleport both of you to another version of the arena. I think there's like 3 different versions of it that have more and more spike balls and more small platforms for you to platform around. It's a really weird boss fight, honestly, but his sprite is large enough that a good couple of magic attacks can take him out very, very quickly, as you saw there. I'll give this level this. It has some very unique set pieces, but it just doesn't exactly feel the best to control when you're in the blue room, or the bosses are a little awkward in both cases. Not my favorite chapter in the game, so to speak, by and large, but also not my least favorite chapter in the game, by and large. I'll get to that soon, trust me. Master, you've done it. The mind of the king was grotesque and mysterious. The mind of one who gives himself to deception seems to be very dark. I was relieved, however, when I saw the universe in his mind. The king has finally awakened. He's begun to teach the people. Let us go and visit the city. Let's do one more check-in around here. The king has prevailed. When deception surrounds you, always will you choose the wrong path. If you can honestly trust someone, you will have learned the value of faith. I hope the king will grow to be a great leader. Master, I can hear people screaming to the southeast of here. Let us go and investigate. Yeah, if they're screaming, that's probably a good indication that things are going real wrong. Welcome to Leon. This was not a rich country, but the people were honest and full of gratitude. A newly appointed king raised the taxes in Leon and forced people to pay. If they refused, they were sent to an underground prison in Gratis. Master, please go east to the underground prison and release the people. Time for what's actually my least favorite chapter of the game, probably. This is Gratis. People from Leon were sent here to be imprisoned. Master, this prison is like a maze. Please, be careful. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 4, time for a prison. See you guys then.